Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. I'm the Grumpy Vet Dino, and today we're fixing some lines on my 2G DSM. Uh, Under the hood of my car, a lot of the hoses for oil, coolant, fuel, even some of my vacuum lines, I've converted over to AN lines. So I wanted to go over those lines with you, kind of give you an idea on what those lines are, and also show you how to put a AN line together, a standard AN hose. So first I'll show you what I found. So instead of using vacuum line to control a lot of the distribution of air underneath the hood of my car, especially for boost control and with the wastegate, I use -4 AN hose. Now, with this hose, you can see it's like a nylon braid, but right here you can see, right there, you can see where it started to melt. This was right up next to the turbo manifold, so this line needed to be replaced. So I thought this would be a good opportunity. I've already taken this line and made a new line, and you can see it right here with -4 AN fittings, and then I put a heat shield on that line so I can put it back in and then it won't melt. This is can handle temperatures up to 1500 degrees, which is way higher than what is going to be seen coming off of, well, not way higher. The radiating heat off that turbo manifold should not see above 1500 degrees. Inside the manifold, under short bursts, very well could see upwards of 1000 degrees. But this will fix that situation and prevent the line from melting and looking like that again. But before I just talk about AN lines, I think it's a problem that many videos explaining AN lines do, is not realizing that AN is a bit of a general term, and that there's multiple different AN lines and AN fittings. So if you're not knowledgeable on what to do, you very well may spend your money buying AN fittings or lines, thinking you're getting the right thing for your application, and really you're not. So I want to break down, there's probably more that I'm speaking about, but I want to talk about the 4 main AN fittings / lines that you're going to see and what they're primarily used for. So the first one being a standard AN fitting like this, which utilizes hose just like this. So this is a nylon braided, it could be stainless steel braided, but it just has a rubber core. And this type of line is good for oil, not great for oil, but good for oil, depending on the temperature. Good for coolant, definitely good for fuel lines, as long as it's not running methanol. Even ethanol is a little rough on this style line, but it can be used. And then air lines, like a vacuum line. But additionally, hoses like that can actually be used. I haven't done it, but I've seen it done, used as a wire protectant. So running wire through an area that's has high heat and doesn't want to get that wire compromised. You can actually run wire through conduit, or in this case, run it through a hose to protect those wires. So that's your standard AN hose. That's what most everything underneath the hood of my car is. In fact, everything that is AN underneath the hood of my car, with the exception of my power steering, is this style of line. The second most popular AN is what they call PTFE, which is basically, it looks similar to this, but it's closer to a Teflon line that you might see, like an air line on an air compressor. That type of line is very similar to a PTFE, but it usually has a covering. In this case, nylon would be what it would look like, or it could be stainless. Those type of lines operate at a much higher pressure. So your standard AN that I'm talking about for like coolants and oils and that kind of stuff can handle pressures around 200 to 300 psi, which is relatively high for your standard automotive application. But PTFE can handle even higher pressures. I would say pressures probably over 1000 psi, and also much harsher fluids. So if you were to turn around and you wanted to run a water methanol line, or a straight methanol line for your methanol injection, you would not want to use a standard AN hose. A PTFE line with that internal like Teflon line will be sufficient to run that and at the higher pressures that a pump for water methanol could use. Those style use what they call an olive. They're a little more difficult to put together, and I'm not going to cover installation of that kind of line in this video, but just know that they're different than a standard AN. And then additionally, you can get AN hydraulic lines. So previously in my power steering video, I showed you the AN hydraulic lines I was using, or hydraulic fittings I was using to plumb my electric power steering and run power steering pressure, which is hydraulic pressure, from the rack and pinion in the front all the way to the pump that's in the back of the car. Those are also AN fittings, but because of the material and because of the hose design, it's able to handle whatever those fittings and hoses are rated for. So in the case of my application, I have lines that are rated for 3,500 PSI, which is more than enough for a power steering pump, especially one that I have dialed down. I don't need as much power steering feedback as, say, a large vehicle that really needs that input. So I made AN style hydraulic fittings. So it's a third kind. And then also there's AN like B-nut fittings for hard lines. You see these in like manifold designs for running multi-port water meth injection, where there's individual lines that are hand bent with ferrules and nuts to thread on. Those are good for really high pressure applications, or applications where you don't want the hose to move or the line to move. Also pretty good for running wiring and conduit. It's a good system, but I want to let you know that there's multiple ones. In this case, I'm talking about 4 different kinds: the hose, the PTFE, the hydraulic fittings, and then standard hard lines. These are all different. So when you see AN fitting, you need to know that you need to be getting the specific lines and fittings to match the style AN that you're getting. So AN means Army Navy fitting. It's a standardized fitting. It's a 37-degree flared fitting, which is good for high pressures. But again, just because your fitting is rated for high pressure doesn't mean the hose you're using is rated for it. So you need to match fittings and hoses to the appropriate application. So let me show you examples of the fittings that I have underneath the hood, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. I'll show you where the line that melted, where it was located, and then where the new one that I made goes. And then I'll go through actually putting together a fitting for you and show you the heat shielding to go over that line, so that you can cover a wide array of applications under the hood of your car. So here underneath the hood of my Eclipse, you can see my wastegate, and then I have normally these would just be air lines, possibly even vacuum lines that would run to get pressure, in this case to the top of my wastegate compared to the bottom. So this is where the bottom line went. It ran from here across the front of the turbo manifold in the actual turbine housing of my turbo, and then ran over to this T section that runs down to the compressor as the boost reference. So this area here got quite a bit of heat. And there's nothing wrong when using this line, but just in the proximity that I had it sitting, it was too close to the heat source and it started to melt. But there's multiple places that you can use AN fittings. So again, I used it all the way going over to my boost controller. I also used it as my pressure relief overflow, going to my overflow canister on for my coolant system. It's also used for, let me get around here, coolant feed hoses going down to my turbo, because it's a water-cooled FP green turbo. And let's see where else I got it. These are large oil lines that are running across the front to go from the oil cooler that is, I think I showed before, is a bit on the large side. You can see the fitting right there. That's an AN fitting that runs across the front of my engine bay. all the way over, and then I can show you over in this wheel well to let me get a good picture for you, to my oil filter housing, and the lines going into there, into that. So I think that kind of shows you how versatile AN fittings can be. You can use them for air, you can use them for oil, you can use them for coolant overflows. I mean, this is just a vacuum line that's going to a catch can. Currently it's disconnected, but you can use them to plumb all kinds of different things underneath the hood of your car. But yeah, these are the standard AN hoses. So I need to put a dump off of my coolant reservoir to dump straight down in the event of overpressurization. So let me go ahead and make a fitting connection to a hose and show you how it's done. To assemble an AN hose, you're going to need a few things. So what we're working with is a 90-degree -4 standard hose AN fitting. And then I have -4 hose. This is black nylon braided just like everything else underneath the hood of my Eclipse. You're going to need something to make a clean cut to start the hose. What I utilize is a Dremel tool. There are specialty tools that are made by companies like Vibrant to cut and make a clean cut. I haven't invested in that tool, but you got to remember that if you're going to make a cut with a Dremel tool, you very well may leave a fine dust inside the hose. So you're going to need to flush the hose before you put it into use. Also, to make life easier, I have a vise. I have AN vise jaws. These are made by Vibrant. They're very helpful. You don't need that, but it does help with the installation. I also have Vibrant AN wrenches. These are anodized aluminum wrenches. They will not mar up your fitting. You spend good money on the fittings. This protects that investment, so it looks good when you get done installing it. And you're also going to need some sort of oil. I'm using oil to lubricate the fitting as we're installing it, but you could probably use WD-40. So the wrenches, the vise and the jaws, and how exactly you want to cut it is really up to you. But this is the setup I use, and I think this is a good way to do it. A link for these wrenches and these jaws to help you with the install will be in the description of the video. But first, like I was saying, you need to make a clean cut. So I've already marked on the hose where I want to cut it. So I'm going to cut this end off. It was already kind of frayed. I use this painter's tape because when you cut it, it'll hold that outside covering of the hose together to make a nice clean look. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my Dremel tool and make this cut off camera, and then we'll come back. Okay, now you can see that nice clean cut has been made with the Dremel. So now we're ready to peel this off and then start assembling the AN hose. So the cut's nice and clean. You can see that all the braids are still together. I think the Dremel does a pretty good job of almost not cauterizing, but melting the nylon so that it doesn't fray. But with this, it'll make it easier for us to stick it into the hose end. So you take the hose end, you unscrew it off of the other fitting body. Grab the end that you just cut, and then with this fitting, you carefully place it over so it doesn't fray, and you can see it's all the way around. Now, you're not going to want to thread it like you would like you were putting on a bolt. You're not going to want to go clockwise. You're going to want to screw it counterclockwise. Some people put this in the vise. I have enough strength in my hands that I can actually turn this onto the hose, and you want to crank it down so that the rubber is actually flush with the end of the threads inside the fitting. So I'm going to turn around and start turning it. Let me move the camera back a little bit. So I'm going to grab it, pull it off, and just slide it over the top. and then start turning it counterclockwise, and you'll have like there's threads on the inside of the ferrule that will start pulling it down onto the hose. So I have it screwed all the way down, and if you see in there, the end of the hose is flush with the bottom of the threads. You want it to come all the way up. And then once you have it all the way flush, where this part of the hose is all the way up to here roughly, now what you need to do is get more painter's tape and mark on here the location of the hose in comparison to the actual fitting body. So I marked where the hose goes up against the actual fitting body. And the reason you do this is as you're screwing this into here, you don't want it to push the hose back out. This lets you know if you're losing engagement of the hose into the fitting body and whether or not you need to retighten it back down and start again. But with this here marked, now what we need to do is put it into the jaws of the vise. Okay, so I have the fitting in the jaws. You don't want to go so tight that you're crushing this aluminum fitting. I know that the jaws are aluminum, but this vise is capable of crushing that aluminum fitting. So you want to get it good and snug. And then also you have the ability to see through the side of the jaws the position of the hose and whether or not it's sliding down. I'm going to go ahead and reposition the camera. That way, hopefully, you'll be able to see the position of the hose in here, and then we'll move on. Okay, I moved the camera, and hopefully you can see the mark we have here on the hose and the fitting in the vise. But now what we have to do is we have to take the other half of the fitting, and we're going to have to lubricate the threads, but also lubricate this end of the fitting here. This end right here is going to go into the hose, and that's what's going to cause the sealing action as this gets pressed down into there. So it's going to cause the end of the hose to expand into the fitting and grab it so it doesn't come back out. So let me go ahead and put a little oil on here. So kind of need it to run around and then run down a little bit. Okay. Now what you do is you place this into the fitting, and then what I ended up doing is go a little counterclockwise to kind of get it to settle into the fitting a little bit. And then once I kind of feel it catch the end of the thread, then with my hand, I start rotating the other direction. Because you don't really want to cross thread this. Granted, as many fittings as I've done, I've never cross threaded it. But I start in by hand and then watch down here to see if the actual hose is being pulled out. Let me get another light in there. And, looks pretty good. And then once it grabs, it really can't pull it out. Sometimes you'll see the hose spin a little bit inside the fitting, but not actually pull out. So now it's gotten more difficult for me to actually do it by hand. So I'm gonna come in with the AN wrench again. I'm not trying to mar up the finish on that fitting that I spent a lot of money on. Granted, a standard AN hose fitting is much cheaper than PTFE fittings. Definitely cheaper than the AN hydraulic. Now you can see the hose is starting to turn, but it's not coming out. Yeah, but the hydraulic AN fitting is quite expensive in comparison to a standard AN. And then right about there, I feel the tension where it's kind of start bottoming out on the fitting. And you got to remember that these fittings are aluminum, so you don't want to turn. You can just snap the end of the fitting off. So that's flush, as you can see right there. In between those two fitting bodies is flush, and that's good enough. So loosen the vise. Loosen it up more than that. Trying to do this behind a camera is a little bit difficult. But as you can see, the fitting is installed and it did not get pulled back out of the hose. So this is actually a good hose end right here. It's really just that simple. Now, in my case, with this being a dump going down, I just need to measure the length that I'm going down to a clamp that I'm going to be using. And then I can use the tape, cut it off again, and then clamp it to where I need to go. But this is how you install a standard AN hose fitting. And with the tape off, actually looks pretty good. So now that we've made our new hose end, depending on what your application is, like for instance with the wastegate, you very well may want to insulate that hose. So using this DEI, it's their fire sleeve and tape kit, and it comes with the actual fire sleeve, which is rated up to 1500 degrees, and then the tape. The tape is like a self-vulcanizing tape. So basically, it will stick to things, but it doesn't stick to other things as well as it sticks to itself. So as you go to wrap it around like this, it turns around and sticks to itself and doesn't peel back. And as it gets hotter, it actually sticks even more. So this stuff is actually really good in general. We use this quite a bit, especially on A10s and a little bit on F-16s when I was in the Air Force. But yeah, this stuff's good. But this DEI fire sleeve, it comes in different diameters. The one I got here is specifically made for -4. So to install it, it's really as simple as slipping it in. So you would grab the end. Granted, I'm not going to use it because I'm using it on a coolant line that's on the other side of the engine bay. But literally, you just stick it in and then slide it on. Just like that. And you go as far as you need. When you buy a single kit of these, it'll come with 3 feet of this line. You really wouldn't want to have more than 3 feet just because how difficult it is to get it to fit in there. But once you get it, you're going to take this tape and then you're going to wrap it around itself, cut off a piece and wrap it around, and that'll seal the end of the line. Just like this, I sealed it over to the fitting end over the hose to make a nice cover. But that would be all you would need to turn a standard AN line into a heat-resistant AN line. Let me go ahead and pull this back out. So I hope this overview of AN fittings and hoses helped you. If you need to move a fluid or air or even wires in your engine bay and you need it to be done in a clean way that looks good, AN fittings and hoses will probably do it for you. I like how they look. I think they're very durable, and I hope I was able to show you some examples. You know, this heat shrinked one, not heat shrink, but heat protected one, plus a standard AN hose end for cooling or whatever you need it to be for. I hope it was able to help you with your project, whether it's Eclipse or a Supra or whatever it is. But if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to my channel. Also, we have a merch store now. This is a Grumpy Vet Garage shirt. The link to that website is in the description. It really helps out the channel, and if you see fit to do so. But until next time, thanks for coming and seeing me in my garage, and have a good one.